thank you for joining us in this webinar for nutrition. Smile Train is extremely grateful to the panelists, the people who are going to take this webinar, which is Dr. Padmasini, and she's the head of pediatrics at SRMC in Chennai. Roshan Kore, she is a senior dietitian from Mumbai, from one of our partners there. Dr. Subodh, you all know, he's a plastic surgeon and project director for the Smile Train program at GS Memorial, Varanasi, India. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for taking out the time to join this very important, perhaps the most important facet of cleft care or child care, pediatric care, whatever you call it, whatever way you look at it, it's the most important facet of pediatric care. Which is nutrition. So we will look at nutrition. We will basically demystify what nutrition means. What is malnutrition? How do we address this issue of nutrition, and how it is so important to the work that we do in cleft care? So all of this is combined in these 2 hours, and we will take it from there. If you have, again, I'm repeating that if you have any questions, please type it in your chat box. If you don't want to do that, you can unmute yourself and ask that question, and we'll be happy to address that. So without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Padmasini. I am going to show the presentation. So I'm going to share my screen. If you have problems, looking at the screen, or if the screen is not clear, type your question in the chat box. I'll be able to see that and I can address that. So over to you, Dr. Padmasini.
I'm sorry. So good afternoon once again, and thank you for the introduction, Mamta. As already said in the introductory remarks, nutrition is fundamental for good health, and this is particularly true for children. Because of the dynamic nature of their growth and development, nutrition is important in every facet of their lives, for physical growth, for organ maturation, and for mental development. And it is often said that it is the first 1,000 days of life. When we say 1,000 days, we refer to the 9 months in utero and the first 2 years of life. It is the first 1,000 days that makes such a tremendous difference in the growth, particularly the cognitive functions of the child. The term malnutrition refers to deficiencies as well as excess in the intake of energy and nutrients. We no longer use the term protein energy malnutrition because malnutrition is a far more complex process which includes not just protein and energy, but also micronutrients, which are so important for good health. So we can have 2 categories, broad groups of malnutrition. One is undernutrition. There are 3 different types of undernutrition depending upon the chronicity of the problem. This includes stunting, wasting, and underweight. We also use the term undernutrition to describe micronutrient deficiencies or insufficiencies. By micronutrients, we refer to those nutrients which are needed in minute amounts, that is vitamins and minerals. Malnutrition also includes overweight and obesity. These are also important because they lead to non-communicable diseases such as heart disease, stroke, diabetes, and cancer. But in today's talk, we will focus on undernutrition. Children with cleft lip and palate are particularly vulnerable to undernutrition, and Dr. Subodh will explain to us why this is so.
Thank you, Dr. Padmasini, and namaste, good afternoon, and assalamu alaikum to all the participants. Okay, so most of you would have seen such cleft children coming to your clinics, and they were some of the fortunate malnourished patients who could come to your clinic. Many of them would not be able to come, and it is not an uncommon sight. Every cleft surgeon has seen so many patients. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. Can I do it? Yeah. So significance of nutrition amongst cleft children cannot be overemphasized. So let us look at the mechanism of breastfeeding first. So the first thing that the child does is latch on the breast. When the child latches on the breast, I will not elaborate the process of latching, you must all be knowing it, but then the child grabs the almost entire areola and sucks in the nipple inside the mouth, and his lower lip everts and upper lip also snugly fits over the areola, and then a negative pressure is generated, and with the help of a tongue which is cupping under the nipple, the child starts sucking the milk. When the lip and alveolus are cleft, it may not fit snugly and there may be some orophagia. But when the palate is also cleft, the negative pressure will not be generated. And because of this lack of negative pressure, child is not able to suck at the breast. And even if the child is holding at the breast and is not sucking and is not feeding, and slowly the child becomes malnourished. This is the malnourishment become more evident in the cleft palate only patients, because the diagnosis is usually late in cleft palate only patients, because if the lip is cleft or lip and palate is both are cleft, you can see it. But many times when only the palate or only the soft palate is cleft, the diagnosis is often very late, and the child cannot create that negative pressure and becomes malnourished by the time it is diagnosed. Next slide. So the feeding is the first casualty, and this is because the cleft palate baby is not able to suck at the breast. So when the baby cannot suck at the breast, the mother tries various ways. So usually the animal milk or the formula milk is given. And when the animal milk or formula milk is given, the mother usually does not know, especially in our region and some of the neighboring states, and the mothers who are coming from villages or who are not very educated, they would not know how to give animal milk and how to prepare a formula milk. So they are not aware of the amount of the milk to be given or dilution of the milk. Sometimes they will over dilute it, and sometimes they will take 100 ml of water and add just 1 spoonful of a powdered milk. Next slide. So the amount and dilution of both are faulty. So usually the amount is less, the total amount of milk may be less, or if they are using the formula milk, the amount of the powdered milk may be less. And sometimes these patients have diarrheas. So many ladies would suggest these mothers that the milk is too concentrate to dilute it further. So they over dilute it, and as a result, the child becomes further malnourished. While diarrhea is happening because of poor hygiene. So in most of the regions, the hygiene is not taken care of well. So they put their fingers in the milk, they do not clean the vessels, they do not boil and sterilize the vessels. So because of the poor hygiene, the child has repeated episodes of diarrhea and vomiting, and the dietary intake is also less, then he has repeated episodes of diarrhea and vomiting, and a vicious cycle ensues and the child becomes malnourished. Next slide, please. So when the child is malnourished, although we do not recommend to operate upon a malnourished child, but what happens when you operate upon a malnourished child? So first thing is anesthesia. So these patients have more chances of going into these patients have more chances to go into hypothermia or hypoglycemia. They have a very low threshold. They have a very low threshold for any invasive monitoring, and they are more prone to develop arrhythmias during the surgeries. And extubation process is also very difficult because their respiratory muscle functions are also impaired, and their airway reflexes are also not very good. So if the patient is malnourished, so they should be extubated when they're fully awake. Then there are chances of aspirations in these patients which are very high, and they have a poor threshold for any type of a post-operative care. So although hypoglycemia can be corrected easily, but there is an increased risk of life-threatening hypoglycemia. But what if you operate upon them? The first thing is every surgeon knows if the poorly nourished patient, the healing will be very poor. And there will be chances of gaping and delayed healing. And the risk of infection will also be high. That will again give rise to gaping of the wound. And the post-operative complications are also very high in poorly nourished patients. And these patients will have more morbidity and more mortality. So there is no reason why we should be operating upon poorly nourished cleft patients. So in the initial stages of even my practice, when the cleft patients were in huge numbers, they were coming up in huge numbers, and the nutritional assessment was not very good, and we were looking for the minimal criteria for which we could operate the patient. We saw the chances of infections were higher and the healing was poorer. And then large number of patients will not get treatment in time. So poor nourishment also delays the treatment of cleft in time. Next, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So we have seen how malnutrition affects the growth and development of a child. And we have also seen how children with a cleft are particularly vulnerable for developing malnutrition. Assessment of nutritional status is an important part of the assessment of every child coming to a healthcare provider. Regardless of the primary complaint of the child, we assess the growth, development, and nutritional status, and we use every opportunity to enhance the nutritional status of the child. In the assessment of nutritional status, we follow the A, B, C, D, E, F, G approach. So A stands for anthropometry, and anthropometry refers to the measurements that we do on the baby, the weight, the height, the head circumference, and the mid-arm circumference. B stands for biochemical tests, which may or may not be indicated. Some of the basic biochemical tests that we do in most cleft children are hemoglobin estimation and sometimes a liver function test, which also gives the serum albumin. More complex tests are required depending upon the nutritional status of the child. C stands for clinical examination to pick up the signs of malnutrition. And D stands for diet history. We have already seen from Dr. Subodh's presentation how important it is to get a good diet history to know exactly why the child is not having sufficient weight gain. E refers to environmental and emotional factors. It's very important for us to keep in mind that feeding is not only for sustenance. It is not just for the physical growth of the child. Feeding is an opportunity to interact with the child. It is an opportunity to enhance the psychosocial development, to improve the emotional bonding between the caregiver and the child. And if feeding is not done with love and affection, it is not going to improve the nutritional status of the child. F stands for functional, that is how well the child is able to function, and G stands for growth monitoring. But in today's presentation, we will focus upon anthropometry and clinical examination as tools for assessment of nutritional status. It is important for us to remember that there are families where the date of birth of the child may not be known. And there are situations where we may not have trained personnel to do anthropometry or to do a clinical examination. In those situations, we need some ways of rapidly screening for malnutrition. For this, we have age-independent indicators of malnutrition. The three most useful indicators are the mid-arm circumference, the Bangle test, and the skin fold thickness. Next slide, please. As we have said before, there are three types of undernutrition. The term underweight is used when the child has a weight that is less than what is expected for the age of the child. Stunting is when there is a small mistake here. Stunting is when the height or the length of the child is less than what is expected for the age. So stunting refers to chronic malnutrition. Wasting is when the weight is inappropriate for the length. So the weight for length becomes the most important indicator of acute malnutrition. In addition to undernutrition, we also look at micronutrient deficiencies. This is very important to keep in mind because in spite of having an adequate weight, an adequate height, the child may still be deficient, and this is referred to as hidden hunger. This may or may not be overt, and these children are also at risk of what we have already described: poor wound healing, susceptibility to infections, and poor cognitive development. Some of the micronutrient deficiencies which may not be obvious on clinical examination are iron deficiency, zinc deficiency, and deficiency of vitamin A, B, C, D, and E. In addition to this, overweight and obesity is another type of malnutrition, which we will not be going into in this presentation. Next slide, please. Yes. So the signs and symptoms of malnutrition, some of us are already familiar with. This is a child who has obvious signs of wasting. The ribs are prominent. There is very little subcutaneous fat. There is very little muscle mass. The limbs are skinny. There are loose skin folds over the wasted muscles. There are loose skin folds around the buttocks, which is referred to as baggy pants. There may be edema, as in this child, and then pallor and vitamin A deficiency. The common forms of malnutrition in India, we used to use the term previously kwashiorkor and marasmus. Kwashiorkor an edematous child and marasmus referred to a wasted child, but currently we don't use these terms. We refer to this situation as severe acute malnutrition without edema, and this as edema. The other clinical signs which we invariably look for, the previous slide, we are not done. Pallor. It is very easy to pick up pallor by comparing the color of your palm with the palm of the child. It is the easiest way to pick up pallor. This child's palm is paler than the palm of the examiner. To look for edema, it is important to put pressure on the dorsum of the foot for 30 seconds and note the pitting. This is vitamin A deficiency in the most severe form. This is keratomalacia, where there is corneal opacification. More subtle forms of vitamin A deficiency are conjunctival xerosis and Bitot spots. In addition to this, we look for rachitic rosary, that is beading of the costochondral junctions, a wide open anterior fontanelle, widening of the wrists, and a double malleolus. If the child has started walking, you may be able to make out bowing of the legs. Next slide, please. Anthropometry is the most important way to assess the nutritional status and to monitor the growth of any child. We need to have trained personnel to get accurate measurements. When you check the weight, it's important that the infant is without clothes, and an electronic weighing scale is preferable. Older children, we allow them to stand barefoot on a weighing scale, and we measure up to 0.01 kgs. When you have children less than 2 years of age, you take the supine length because they cannot stand erect. But when you have children above 2 years of age, you measure the standing height. For measuring the supine length, we need an infantometer, and we need two observers, one to stabilize the head of the child and the other to move the sliding scale at the foot end to measure the length. This is a stadiometer. It is important for the child to stand erect, and for the occiput, scapula, buttocks, calf, and heels. All the 5 points should be touching the wall to get an accurate measurement of the standing height. Next, please. Head circumference measurement is very important for picking up microcephaly and macrocephaly, and that indicates either a very serious chronic form of malnutrition or some other developmental delay. It is an important measurement for all children. The occipitofrontal circumference. You take the tape around the most prominent part of the occiput across the glabella and measure the head circumference. It is 35 centimeters at birth. Brain growth is most rapid in the first 3 months of life. The head circumference increases by 2 centimeters per month in the first 3 months. And then it increases by 1 centimeter per month for the next 3 months and half a centimeter per month from 6 to 12 months. So keeping a record of the head circumference is very, very useful for picking up disorders of brain growth. Next, please. Next slide, please. We spoke about the importance of having age-independent indicators of malnutrition. The mid-arm circumference remains constant between the age of 1 and 5 years. So if you have a child in this age range and you do not know the exact age of the child, you cannot use the weight for age or the length for age, but you can use the weight for length and you can use the mid-arm circumference. The mid-arm circumference is age and gender independent, and it can be done in a large number of children in very little time, and we don't need too many sophisticated equipment or trained personnel. It is the midpoint between the acromion and the olecranon, and for rapid measurement we have what is called the Shakir's tape. In the Shakir's tape, if you get it, the circumference in the green zone, that is, it is about 12.5 centimeters, the child can be put in the normal nutrition category. Yellow zone needs attention. The mid-arm circumference is 11.5 to 12.5. But the red zone children, which is less than 11.5, are severely malnourished. These severe acute malnutrition children should preferably be referred for further evaluation and nutritional rehabilitation.
Okay, so I'm just going to stop the screen share for a little while and try and see if the mark goes.
The challenges of feeding children with clefts are many, and most of the caretakers will struggle with this because there is nasal regurgitation because of the feeding. There's excessive air intake. The child is fatigued because it's a lot of effort to feed, as well as the malnourishment plays a role. There's chances of choking if the feed does not go directly to the GI tract. There's exhaustive and prolonged feeding, which further leads to fatigue in the child. Frequent burping is required because there's excessive air intake during feeding, and it causes a lot of discomfort to the mother because it is a tedious affair to feed this child. So all these different problems makes feeding the child very difficult. So what are the solutions for feeding children with clefts? Combination. Yeah, next slide, please. So a combination of breast, bottle, spoon or cup feeding can be used, or for the feeding of the child. Lactation counseling, previous one. Yeah, thank you. Lactation counseling pertaining to the correct positioning of the child plays a very important role. So it is very much mandatory that some person in your team is working with the mother or the caretaker to establish lactation, because it requires a lot of support. Expressing the milk directly in the mouth rather than in a katori will help to establish breastfeeding in these kids, because it will work for the mother as well as for the child. Many centers will suggest use of appliances, but we do not recommend this because it has more side effects or disadvantages. This will come in the next as a talk goes ahead. This point will be covered. Some of the instructions that will help feeding the child are: feed often, at least 8 to 12 times over a period of 24 hours. This will cause less fatigue for the child. Feeding should not be exhaustive. It should be limited to around 30 minutes at a time, so that it gives time for the mother as well as the baby to relax. Burping should be done more often, like during one period of feeding, at least 2 to 3 times. Oral hygiene maintenance is important, especially if prostheses have been recommended. Sterilization of the feeding bottles, nipples, vati, spoon is very important. This basically in our rural areas, because of lack of general hygiene, needs to be emphasized thoroughly, because many of the cleft children end up with loose motions, diarrhea, and several GI infections which come through the food sources. So washing the utensils properly, sterilizing it with hot water, and then covering these utensils in a container so that no flies or any other insects can contaminate it. Strict hygiene while feeding is required. Basically, this means that when the child is being fed, the mother's hands should be clean. When if a feeding is done through a palada or a vati spoon, the fingers of the mother or the caretaker shouldn't be dipping into the child's mouth or into the feed. This way, it will contaminate the feed. So care has to be taken to have strict hygiene during feeding. Also, a lot of reassurance to the caretakers needs to be given with patience, as babies with cleft take longer time to feed. So, a lot of reassurance and patience is required. Thank you. Next slide.
So when we look at the guidelines for nutrition for children with cleft, we have to keep in mind that these are not different from the guidelines for a typical child. The general guidelines for any newborn is early initiation of breastfeeding within the first hour of birth, exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months, continued breastfeeding for up to 2 years, appropriate complementary foods after the completion of 6 months, micronutrient supplementation, and attention to nutrition and anemia control in the lactating mother. We have to remember that you cannot change these guidelines just because the child has a cleft. We have to see how to implement these guidelines in spite of the cleft. The next slide, please. The tremendous benefits of breastfeeding are known to all. All the health organizations, including the World Health Organization, know the importance of exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months. There are challenges in implementing this in a child with cleft. In children with a cleft lip alone, it may be possible to continue with exclusive breastfeeding. The child may be able to generate sufficient suction to take adequate amounts of breast milk. You may have to hold the two edges of the cleft lip together for the baby to be able to get a good latch. But every attempt has to be made for early initiation of breastfeeding within the first hour. Any amount of breast milk is beneficial. If we are not able to achieve exclusive breastfeeding, you don't have to give up on it. We particularly recommend breast milk for babies because it does not irritate. We know that some amount of milk is going to go into the nose and throat, and breast milk is far less irritant to the delicate tissue of the nose and throat than formula milk. And if there is a dedicated lactation nurse to support the mother, this is true not only for cleft children, even normal children, if the mother is a primey, need this kind of a support to establish breastfeeding. Once breastfeeding is established, for continuing breastfeeding, we have to encourage the mother to put the baby to breast for 5 minutes on each side. This is very, very important for stimulating the production of the hormones which will sustain breastfeeding. Next slide, please.
So Dr. Padmasini, I have to stop you here. Before you move ahead to the next slide, I have two relevant questions which have come in. One question is from someone, I don't have the name. If a child under 6 months is using a formula, do they still have to be supplemented by calcium, vitamin D, iron, and multivitamins?
It depends upon the volume of formula that the child is consuming. If the child is getting more than 1000 ml of fortified formula, there is no need to supplement any micronutrient. But a child who's getting less than 1000 ml will require vitamin D alone till 6 months of age. Beyond 6 months, the child will require vitamin D and iron. I have a slide on micronutrient supplementation.
Okay. The same person is asking, can a child be given goat's milk? If yes, what age group? Again, if this has to be given, what has to be given with some nutritional supplements?
We are not recommending animal milk as the first choice, so long as the resources permit. If breast milk is not adequate, we would prefer the child to go on to an infant formula. The two nutrients which are lacking in goat's milk are folic acid and iron. All the children who are on animal milk will require supplementation of vitamin D, iron, and those on goat's milk will, in addition to that, require folic acid.
A question from Dr. Karun Agarwal. What are the minimum anthropometric measurements should be recorded for children with cleft, and how often?
There was a slide on this actually. This is very important. As a part of well baby care, the anthropometric measurements are usually recorded at birth and at 6, 10, and 14 weeks when they come for their primary immunization. What we recommend is below 6 months of age, you take the measurements every month. Above 6 months till 12 months, you take it every second month. And in the second year of life, that is from 12 to 24 months, you take it once in 3 months. After 24 months, you take it once a year till the child finishes his adolescent growth spurt.
Okay, thank you. There are some questions for Roshan. Okay. That's Renu Parmar from Bangalore. She wants to know what is the nutritional value of goat's milk, as many patients from rural areas want to do that. And then she says that often many mothers complain of no breast milk. So we are left with only 2 options, formula or cow's milk or goat's milk. So.
Yeah, so I really don't know the value of goat's milk, the nutritional values as such, but as Dr. Padmasani mentioned, we do not recommend any kind of animal milk to children below 6 months of age. The first choice is breast milk. The other option is a fortified formula. In case children, the finances or the other issues are prevalent and we cannot continue giving formula feed, instead of waiting for 6 months, the weaning feeds can be started by around 4 to 5 months of age. So basically, you have to work around the availability of formula if breast milk is not available. Also, as Dr. Padmasani had mentioned, counseling the mothers for lactation helps make the breast milk available. Many a times the mother's nutritional status or the anxiety because of the situation of the child can cause lack of breast milk availability. But if you really go into the depth of it and find the cause for unavailability of breast milk, maybe you can work on this.
Yeah, so this question is for Dr. Padmasani. They say that, in the rural area, or especially people who have put their children on animal milk, then should we then supplement that with folic acid and other nutrients because they are already started the child on cow's milk or goat's milk or whatever animal milk?
Yes, whether it is breast milk or whether it is animal milk, they will need vitamin D till 6 months of age. And beyond 6 months of age, these children will need iron in addition to vitamin D. It's only those who are getting more than 1000 ml per day of formula who do not need micronutrient supplementation, because all the infant feeding formula are fortified.
Right. So one question for Roshan, what is vati?
Vati is a word for katori or a bowl. So these are different words. So vati is basically a small container in which the feed for the bachu can be, for the baby can be collected. So it's the other terms are katori or a bowl.
Okay, thank you. So one question for Dr. Subodh. Dr. Amit Agarwal has observed that most of the parents of the malnourished cleft patients lose interest to feed the baby even after proper counseling. What is the solution?
You have to really work on it. There may be many different issues. So they see that the child is deformed, is not growing up well, is malnourished. So many times the parents think this child will always remain a problem. So he will not grow well, will be malnourished and poor in health, and we will have to spend a lot of money and time on this child all the time. So they lose interest. So there are other social reasons also that I will discuss in my talk also. So these are the patients who are real challenges, and you must act very intelligently. You have to counsel them. You have to talk to them on phone. You have to call them frequently. You have to monitor the growth of the child, and also encourage parents and try to see what is their social and economical condition. So you have to talk to them more frequently. So because these are the real patients where you have a challenge to save the child, and you must make an extra effort for them.
Thank you. Dr. Padmasani, please go ahead. I'm changing your slide for you.
So I cannot overemphasize the importance of teaching the mother to hold the baby and put the baby to breast, regardless of the effectiveness of the sucking. This is important not for the production or not for the sucking or the intake of milk by the baby. This is important for sustaining the production of milk by the mother. Many centers have started using breast pumps to pump out the milk, and they give it to the baby using different feeding devices. Even though we have to use a breast pump when you're unable to manually express the milk, it cannot replace this action of the mother holding the baby, skin to skin contact, and the baby sucking directly. This stimulates the production of prolactin, which is important for milk production, and oxytocin, which is important for milk ejection. This is also very important for bonding between the mother and the baby. This can probably partially answer the question of the previous participant. This is going to help in mother-infant bonding and improve the nutritional status in many other ways. The complementary feeding guidelines are also not different from that of other children. We start at 6 months. As already mentioned by Roshan, if there is insufficient mother's milk and there are poor resources and we cannot buy formula, we can start at the completion of 4 months, but not earlier than that. Over a period of 6 to 9 months, we have to empower the baby to feed from the family pot. The mother has to be taught to make the complementary food energy dense, even though the routine recommendation is to not add sugar or salt before 1 year of age. If you are not able to provide sufficient calories, you can add a little bit of jaggery and butter, ghee, or oil. We have already described why these children swallow a lot of air. So we have to focus on giving them smaller volumes, calorie-dense complementary foods. The food must be thick in consistency. Many mothers make the mistake of making the complementary foods very thin. They should be so thick that they should stay on the spoon without running off when the spoon is tilted. It is important for us to show them either practically or with videos how thick the complementary food should be. We need to reassure the parents that it is inevitable that food will pass through the nose of the child. This may cause the baby to sneeze, and it may be distressing for the parents. But when we tell them that this is expected, we find that you can gradually build up the confidence of the parents to give complementary feed. And it is important to finish each meal with a clear fluid so that it helps to clean up the food from the cleft area. The parents should identify the food that is most suitable for their baby. It should be fresh, freshly prepared, clean, and affordable. We encourage them to use cereals and pulses in a 2:1 ratio. To improve the calorie content and to make the food nutrient rich, we encourage them to germinate or sprout the grain before they make the flour. And toasting the grain also helps to make the porridge less viscous, so that more grains can be added to the porridge and the calorie density can be improved. We also encourage them to give easily available, cost-effective, seasonal uncooked fruits and green vegetables. Jaggery can be added, as already mentioned, to improve not only the palatability but also the calorie density. Next slide, please.
So continuing with what Dr. Padmasani was saying, introduction of weaning feeds is mandatory for children beyond 6 months of age, because the breast milk is not adequate to supply all the nutrients that the baby requires 6 months onwards. So if the breast milk is not available, you give formula milk, but beyond 6 months of age, the weaning and complementary foods have to be started. So you start with a cereal mixture like a rice kanji or a rice cooked in water, which is in a very pasty form. You can also make ARF, what Dr. Padmasani was describing is called a amylase rich flour. So the advantage of making amylase rich flour is we can add more quantity of flour or powder into the same amount of water without making it very thick or viscous. So that way, if you're using plain atta or a flour, you will add around 2 teaspoons to 100 ml of water to make a porridge of a certain thickness. But in the same water, you can add around 3 to 4 teaspoons of the ARF amylase rich flour. The previous slide is amylase rich flour, and get a thin, less viscous product, thereby providing more nourishment to the child. So you can make rice moong dal powder, we call RMP, which is usually made in the ratio of 2 parts of rice to 1 part of moong dal. Now this can be used in a different variations, where you can use different kinds of millets that are locally available. It could be ragi, jowar, bajra, any millet that is locally grown would have varied kind of nutrients, like bajra would be high in iron, ragi would be high in calcium. So using different cereals would be of great use. Also introducing mashed fruits, whatever is locally available. It could be banana, it could be papaya. So locally available, easy and cheap fruits and vegetables should be introduced to the child around 7 months of age. By the aim of the feeding the child should be such that by the time the child is a year old, he should be eating a whole meal from what the family is eating. It could be a little less spicy, but the same foods should be served to the child by the time he is 1 year of age.
Roshan, this question is for you.
Yeah.
Why is salt not recommended?
Okay, so salt, the baby's requirements for salt and is not as much as that you need. See, when the child is, I think Dr. Padmasani is also going to elaborate on this. So basically the child does not require extra salt, because if you are giving extra salt in the food, it can damage the child's kidneys. And the child also needs to slowly develop the taste and understand the taste for the basic foods that are served to him. If we add too much of salt, the child would be used to eating excessive salt in the food and not eat the basic foods. But basically, till the child is 1 year of age, not too much of salt, sugar or oil is recommended. When we are talking about our cleft palate children, they are malnourished. So we recommend that sugar or jaggery and oil, ghee or butter should be added to the feeds. But coming to salt, it is not recommended because it is not healthy for the child. Dr. Padmasani.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Roshan. It increases the osmotic load on the kidneys without providing any nutritive value to the child. It is very important for the child to be able to enjoy the natural food of the natural taste of all the foods in the first year of life. Very often it is the taste which they acquire in the first year of life that they continue to prefer for the rest of their life. We all know that we get adequate amount of salt from our diet, and this need to add salt is an acquired taste. because we have been brought up, we find it difficult to eat food without added salt. So let us lay a healthy foundation for children, and kidneys have not yet matured. Because of this, you do not want to increase the osmotic load on the kidneys.
I have a question. Sorry. So I have a question from Dr. Subodh, who wants to know how much vitamin D should be given.
Vitamin D requirement is 400 international units per day for term babies. For preterm babies, we may have to give more than this, 400 to 1000 international units per day till 6 months of age. As I said before, all the infant formulae are fortified with vitamin D. And if there is an infant taking more than 1000 ml per day, there is no need to give added vitamin D. But exclusively breastfed infants are at highest risk. Even if the mother is sufficient, the baby is at risk. They need vitamin D supplementation. All babies, cleft or no cleft, all babies from 6 months of age require iron supplementation at 2 milligram per kg per day. I'm giving the requirement for a child with normal nutritional status. An anemic child would need the therapeutic dose of iron, which goes from 3 to 6 milligram per kg per day. And to prevent vitamin A deficiency, Government of India has the vitamin A prophylaxis program. From 9 months of age, every 6 months, the baby gets initially 50,000 international units and then 2 lakh international units till the age of 5 years. So if the baby is already on the Government of India vitamin A prophylaxis program, we do not have to give separate vitamin A. Otherwise, at 9 months of age, when the baby comes for MMR vaccine, the immunization clinic gives the first dose of vitamin A. Next slide, please.
Dr. Badmasni, there's this question from Bangladesh, from Professor B.K. Das. He wants to know that sometimes poor rural cleft babies of below 6 months come with SAM, breast milk completely suppressed. They are unable to buy costly formula milk. What can we do?
Yes. So here we have to strike a balance between what is ideal and what is realistic for the family. If there is a nutrition support program from the government or from some other organization, we may be able to help in buying formula for the child. Otherwise, we have to use cow's milk or any animal milk, preferably pasteurized animal milk. The most important point is it should be given undiluted. We know that even newborn babies can digest undiluted cow's milk. And at completion of 4 months, we introduce complementary food. This is the recommendation when we are operating in a resource limited situation.
Yeah, so what about someone is asking, can eggs be used for weaning children?
We recommend introduction of eggs around 9 months of age. The first part of the egg to be introduced is the yellow part. And when we find that the child does not have any allergies, we introduce the white part also.
Okay. So can anemic babies before the age of 6 months, should they be given iron supplements?
Yes. The preterm baby, the maintenance dose of iron is 2 milligram. Iron deficiency anemia is 3 to 6 milligrams per kg per day. Are there any more questions regarding micronutrient supplementation? Slide. When we are teaching the mother feeding, we also have to, shall we continue?
Yeah.
Okay. We also have to teach them oral hygiene. We have already seen that formula milk is irritant to the nasal mucosa. This results in a snuffly baby. Breast milk, to a less extent than the formula. Formula fed babies will require 2 to 3 spoons of cooled boiled water after each feed to remove the milk deposits from the nasal airway. That is all that is required. We do not encourage mothers to try and clean the milk deposit. Good oral hygiene is also important for preventing dental caries. I think this is Roshan's slide. She has already
Yes.
spoke. Yeah.
No, So coming to the post-operative nutrition care, the guidelines are, we have to ensure that there is enough liquids and adequate hydration maintained post-operative, because many times this gets neglected and the child could become dehydrated. For 1 week post surgery, there should be feeds which are usually strained liquids like soups, juices, rice water, dal water. Cow's milk, if given, should be strained just before feeding, so there's no cream layer or a malai layer which can get stuck into the stitches. Infant formula, if given, should be given in the standard dilution. Breast milk can be given. So for 1 week, the feed that are given should not have any grainy particles which can get stuck in the surgical area. Resume soft feeds 1 week after the surgery. These foods should be soft cooked and mashed, like mashed fruits and vegetables. Soft, smooth foods like porridges, khichdi, blenderized mashed kheer, mashed banana or papaya. So soft mashed foods. No hard food is allowed for 6 weeks after surgery. Also, you have to make sure that the child is comfortable, and for that the food should not be too hot. So the temperature has to be checked without being unhygienic about it. So that part is also important. Oral hygiene is of importance during this period. So counseling needs to be done before the child gets discharged about oral hygiene. And personal hygiene, as we had mentioned, I had mentioned earlier, that while feeding, the fingers, tips of the hands should not be dipping into the feed of the baby, so as to avoid any kind of infections due to feeding.
So most of these things have already been described by Dr. Padmasani and Dr. Roshan, and I shall be re-emphasizing those things. Many of these things have already been mentioned. So about the counseling, so I will discuss some practical things only. So the first thing that I have to say about the counseling is the initiation of counseling has to be done by the surgeon himself, because the cleft patients are coming to them first. So he is the person who has to start the counseling. He shouldn't straight away send the patient to either a pediatrician or a nutritionist or a feeding counselor. He should start it there. So and explain why feeding is important and what kind of feeding should be done. Everything he has to explain. So what are the feeding options available to us? As has been explained already, mother's milk is the best milk available, and then formula milk, their protein component is similar to the mother's milk, and therefore they can be given, and the lactose milks are better. Animal milks has been already explained that they have a protein waste casein ratio which is just reverse to the mother's milk, so they have a high solute load on an immature kidney, and these patients who are on animal milk since beginning, they develop allergies later on, but it is cheap and easily available. So as far as possible, animal milk should not be used in children below 1 year of age, but if there is nothing available, then animal milk can be used. But if it is being used, water should never be added, and preferably cow's milk should be given. Buffalo milk and goat's milk should be avoided. So what is the best method of feeding? This also has been described earlier. So the best method is certainly breastfeeding. Now, this has to be direct breastfeeding, directly the expressed milk feeding into the mouth of the baby. Dr. Padmasani has explained the role of hormones and breast hypothalamus axis, and why it is important for the mother to have the baby at her breast. So because the milk formation will occur, milk ejection will occur. If they start using the breast pump or start expressing the breast milk into a katori and then feed them, then there are two issues. One, that the lactation will cease very soon. In a month's time or a month and a half, the lactation will cease. Second, you have utensils in between, and you have to sterilize them and keep them clean. Then you can do a katori spoon feeding, which is the next best feeding available. And of course, a katori and a spoon have to be boiled for at least 20 minutes. And then it has to be kept in the vessel in which it has been boiled. The common mistake is that once they boil it and then they again clean it with running water. or they wipe it off with some clothes. So that should not be done. It should be emphasized, because even if you explain to them that it has to be boiled, they will boil it and then wipe it up with some cloth, or rinse it again with some cold water. Then a bottle feeding. And there are many special kinds of bottles and appliances available. I will discuss about them in the next slide. Hygienic practices have already been explained. And what are the common mistakes in feeding? So first mistake which I see very commonly is the too diluted milk. Whether it is an animal milk or whether it is a powder milk, it is too diluted. First, because of ignorance. Second, because of financial reason. If they are purchasing the powder milk, they want it to last a little longer. And third, because of the wrong advice given to the mother, especially if the baby had diarrhea. So many ladies will advise them to dilute the milk. They say because it is a concentrated milk, the child is having diarrhea, so dilute the milk. And then they dilute the milk. So that should not be done. And then force feeding should not be done, because the child will develop an aversion to the force feeding. And it is a common scene in our outpatient that we see cleft patients coming with a nasogastric tube or orogastric tube in. So the tube feeding should be avoided as far as possible. And do not ever feed a crying baby. If the baby is hungry and if you take milk to him, the baby will become calm. But if the baby continues to cry, there are some other reasons, and you should first make the baby calm and then feed. And another big mistake is feeding far inside the mouth. Many mothers think that because of the cleft, a lot of milk comes out of the nose, and therefore it is a good idea to put the milk deep inside the mouth, and they use long teeth nipples or spoons or droppers, and they deposit the milk way inside the mouth in the pharynx. So what happens when too much of milk is poured at a time, or it is placed far inside the mouth? So there is a cycle of feeding and then breathing, and feeding and breathing. And when swallowing and breathing, and swallowing and breathing, when the child has swallowed a gulp and there is still some milk remaining in the oropharynx, and then the child starts breathing, some of the milk can go in the trachea. So there will be aspiration. So feeding deep inside the mouth is a mistake, and pouring too much of milk at one time is also a mistake, and it can lead to aspiration. Then strict scheduling of feeding, especially in cleft babies, that should not be done. If the baby is hungry, the baby should be fed as early as possible. So diluting milk, the child has diarrhea, I've already explained. Can we have the next slide, please? So now this is how I explain the mothers. If they come in group, so I make them sit, all of them together, and all of them may have different questions, different problems. So I explain to them, and I use all utensils and all kinds of bottles to explain them. A common problem with them is they believe that if the milk goes into the nose, they will have aspiration, and the milk will go into the trachea. So I have to explain them by making diagrams that if the milk goes into the nose, it is not going to the trachea. And I tell them that the airway of this child is as good as mine or yours. So this has to be explained. This is the common mistake, especially after the lip operation has been done and a palate has not been done. So now they see a lot of milk coming through the nose. Before that, they don't see, because all the milk falls inside, and after the lip has been repaired, they see the milk coming over the lip. So they're afraid. They're afraid of feeding them, weaning them, and giving them solid food after 6 months of age. And the child, which was healthy till the lip was operated, and a couple of months after, becomes malnourished because they have delayed the weaning, and they have continued with a lot of milk afterwards also. And if they feed a lot of animal milk, they become anemic as well. So this has to be explained, that if the food is going into the nose, then it will not go into the trachea. Then from there, your counselors and nutritionists, dietitians have to take over that counseling. So after they get the counseling from you, they should go to the counselor where they should feed. And if a child, if the mother has come too early, or the child is a few days or a few weeks old and the mother is still lactating, then our counselor demonstrates them and trains them how to feed the baby directly from the breast. And they keep the patient for a few hours in the hospital so that they could give 2-3 feeding. So after 2 or 3 feedings, they become trained and they can do it at home. So the counseling has to be done repeatedly. So I counsel them, then the counselors counsel them, then she calls them up by phone and finds it out whether they're feeding the baby nicely or not, if the baby is growing nicely or not, what is the weight gain. They ask them to get the child weighed, and they make a chart of it, they make a note of it. So the other common mistakes are like in hygiene, if they're using this kind of thing, which is there in the diagram, and they will just pour into the katori like this, and then their fingers will be dipped into the milk. This is the common mistake. Or they will put the finger in this like this, and the finger will touch the milk. And if they are feeding with a spoon, here you can see in the lower diagram, the child is lying supine, while the child should be upright by about 45 degrees. So another mistake is to putting the finger in the cup of the spoon like this. So it should be held with the handle. So this should be explained to the mother, because this is the common way they have seen all the time, and they keep on doing this. So no matter what method is employed, great care must be taken not to flood the pharynx and therefore provoke aspiration. Next slide, please. And of course, the burping should be done. I tell the mothers that you should burp every 5 minutes during the feeding, and this feeding would take somewhat 30 minutes to 40 minutes for one feeding. And every 5 minutes, you should put either on the shoulder or on your hand and pat the child for burping. So for every feed, you should do burping for 3-4 times. Next slide. Yeah, so in my chamber, I keep all different kinds of bottles, which I'm showing here. So there's so many different kinds of bottles available in the market, and including can you show the next slide? So including the Hyperman feeder and pigeon baby bottles, and lot of orthodontists also make obturators to facilitate feeding. But over the years, I've developed a feeling that nothing but a simple bottle is required. In fact, these bottles are dangerous. Now, this is a fine tube-like thing, which places the idea is to place the milk way inside the mouth. This is again a dropper, which places the milk way inside the mouth. This is a spoon, which can come handy, but then the mother tends to put it inside the mouth, or lot of milk can flow in, and a copious amount of milk can be deposited in the oropharynx of the mother. And with all these bottles, although they may be convenient, there is an increased risk of aspiration, and therefore I say that these should not be used. So if you're using any bottle, then you should use the normal common bottle, and only thing that you should do is you should enlarge the hole in the nipple by a warm needle, not by cutting it, but by a warm needle. So when you fill the milk and you turn it upside down, the milk should flow in drops and not in a stream, and it should flow spontaneously. So it should flow in drops, not in a stream. So the normal bottle with an enlarged hole is good idea. So first is breast milk, second is katori spoon, and third is normal bottle. I even don't advise them to use the breast pump. So the milk can be drawn. Sometimes the mothers find it difficult to express with the hand. So breast pump can help them, and many mothers do well with the using breast pump, but most don't, and the breast milk ceases to form. So the baby should be kept on the breast and for that sensation to happen, and so that the milk continues to form and the mother can lactate from the breast milk. If the lactation is not there, if the breastfeeding is not possible, then formula milk is the second best option. And
yes, hello.
Thank you.
So we have seen how important it is to give the correct guidelines.
Dr. Padmasini, before you get into monitoring tools and measurement, I have a few questions which have come in, which I'd like you to, particularly post-op feeding instructions for lip and palate patients, children.
Yeah, I would take that question. So we start feeding 4 hours after lip and palate. Now, in our hospital, we have started for lip patient whose mothers are still lactating, we start breast milk on the same day. First, we give some clear water, and after 4 hours, and if they're swallowing well, there is no problem. Then we a couple of hours later, we start breastfeeding. So initially we start with some formula milk, and then 6 hours later we can start the breastfeeding. So the breastfeeding can safely be started on the same day in the lip patient, especially the unilateral lip patient. In palate patients also, we start with the clear water first at 4 hours, and then we slowly start giving milk. But breastfeeding is obviously not possible in clear palate patients.
Thank you, Dr. Subodh. I'd just like Dr. Padmasini to review that question again from a SRM, point of view.
Yes, in fact, the guidelines that we follow in the post-op period are identical to the one that Roshan presented. We start with clear fluids, and then we encourage to ensure that there is no skin on the milk and there is no grainy particle in the food that they are giving. It's identical to the guidelines which Roshan has presented.
So yeah, so there's one more question, that if breast milk is excessive and it's expressed and it's stored, can we keep it in the refrigerator? For how long? Should it be in the freezer? Should it be in the refrigerator? And for how long can mothers use it for children?
Yes, this is particularly important for working mothers, but as long as the baby and the mother are together, we would like the milk to be expressed. That is not possible if the mother is expressing the milk somewhere else. In room temperature, if it is an air-conditioned room, you can keep it for as long as 4 hours. But given the kind of topic that we have, that as soon as the milk is expressed, it should be refrigerated. In the refrigerator compartment, it can be there for 24 hours. And in the freezer compartment, it can be kept for as long as 3 months. But then we do not want the frozen milk to be thawed and then refrozen. So it should be stored in a way that thawing is going to be done only for the amount that is going to be consumed immediately after thawing. It is also very important to pay attention to hygiene, to sterilize all the equipment that is used for collecting and storing the breast milk. So,
okay, one last question. Yeah. Many mothers continue to feed beyond 1 year of age. What to
breastfeed? Are we talking about breastfeed?
Yes, breastfeed.
Encourage them, compliment them, praise them. We want the babies to get mother's milk for as long as possible. Let the baby decide when he wants to stop breastfeeding. All the concepts of breast milk addiction and the baby's temperament changing because of breast milk being continued are unscientific. We encourage us to continue giving breastfeeding.
Thank you.
But the exclusive breastfeeding can be continued beyond 1 year?
So the effectiveness of the counseling, the guidelines, we need to know by monitoring the growth of the child. This is not specifically for children with cleft. Growth monitoring monitoring is an integral part of pediatric care. Every child should have a growth chart, and import all the anthropometric measurements that we take periodically, once in a month till 6 months of age, once in 2 months from 6 months to 12 months, and once in 3 months from 12 to 24 months. These values have to be plotted on a growth chart. Very often we find people maintaining a register. It does not have the same visual impact as a growth chart. Which growth chart to use? We have universal, internationally accepted growth charts created by the World Health Organization. World Health Organization uses the term growth standards. This is different from the growth chart which we used to use previously, that is the CDC growth chart. The CDC growth chart was created by cross-sectional evaluation of children of different ages. But WHO has longitudinally followed up children in countries all over the world and prepared growth standards. That means it tells us at what weight a healthy, exclusively breastfed baby should be growing. So we recommend that all the centers should use the WHO growth chart or the IAP growth chart. The new IAP growth chart, which was released in 2015, has integrated the WHO growth charts into their original growth charts. But there is a practical difficulty in using the IAP growth chart. In the first 6 months of life, which is when the growth monitoring is most important, all the lines have been cluttered. It is a very crowded period in the first 6 months. That is why we are preferring to use the WHO growth charts. There are growth charts, the previous one. There are growth charts which give the centile. WHO gives centile charts. WHO also gives the Z-score charts. We are strongly recommending the Z-score chart. The Z-score is nothing but the observed value of weight, height, or head circumference minus the median value of the reference population divided by the standard deviation of the reference population. This tells you how much different your observed value is from the median value of the reference population. A normal value is any value between +2 and -2. This is called the healthy weight for age. So if it is less than -2 Z-score, the baby is called underweight. If it is -2 to -3, the baby is called moderately underweight. And if it is less than -3, the baby is called severely underweight. The terms that we use are different for weight length for age and for weight for length, but this remains the same. So we were talking about growth charts, and we were talking about why it is important to plot the anthropometric measurements at every visit to the healthcare center on the growth chart. So even though undernutrition is defined as just insufficient food intake, for practical purposes, we are classifying undernutrition as moderate acute malnutrition. That means the Z-score, weight for height Z-score is less than -2, but more than -3. These children can be managed at home with adequate nutritional counseling. But there is another group of children whose weight for length Z-score is less than -3. Any one of these criteria, weight for height Z-score less than -3, mid upper arm circumference less than 11.5, or bilateral pitting edema or visible wasting, puts the child in the category of severe acute malnutrition. Children with severe acute malnutrition are particularly vulnerable because A, their immune system is dysfunctional. If they get any infection, they will not be able to cope. They are at serious risk of metabolic complications. They are at serious risk of hypothermia. For these reasons, these children are better managed in a hospital or in a nutritional rehabilitation center. Next. Next, please. This is the growth chart that we recommend for monitoring children. It is the WHO growth chart. We have age and gender specific for length for girls. The similar chart for boys comes in blue color, and between +2 and -2, any value between these two lines is taken as normal. Anything between -2 and -3 is moderate acute malnutrition, and less than -3 is severe acute malnutrition. This visual impact is very effective in counseling the mothers. You tell them that if you are giving adequate, not just mothers, the entire family has to take responsibility. If you are giving adequate food, your child will grow along this path. That way, the mother also eagerly participates in the process of checking the weight and plotting the weight on the growth chart. And this also helps you to pick up any growth faltering before it goes below the -2 or -3 Z-score. If you find that it has dropped through 2 standard deviations, it may still be within -2, but previously the child was in +1 and now he is in -1. You have to figure out what is going on and you have to take action. The commonest cause of growth faltering is inadequate nutrition, but we also have to keep in mind that children with cleft lip and palate are likely to be syndromic. Midline cleft defects can be associated with hypopituitarism and growth hormone deficiency. They are also likely to have chronic systemic illnesses, congenital heart disease. So this plotting of the growth of the child on a growth chart helps in early diagnosis and appropriate investigations and management. This is the importance of growth monitoring for children. Many of the maternity hospitals will have the old IAP chart. The old IAP chart is also good in the sense that you know that the child is growing well, but the new IAP charts have integrated this to continue growth monitoring from 0 to 18 months. Next slide, please. The government of India has given a mother and child card to all the mothers. So many of our mothers who have delivered with the National Health Mission will be having this card. This card is also good because the green zone tells you that the child is on the road to health. The yellow zone is when you have to sit up, and the red zone is when the child has come into the malnutrition range. So these are the different growth charts. When we are starting a nutrition program, we strongly recommend using the WHO growth charts.
So Dr. Padmasani has explained how to monitor the growth of the child. And so we started this program at our center several years ago, and we trained the counselors, and then we started monitoring the growth of every cleft child that visited us. So we recorded every visit by the patient, and whatever was happening, we were using the IAP chart for this, and we took all the anthropometric measurements also, and the child growth was monitored. And whenever we found that the child was going below the expected range, we added a red flag. But it was not possible every time for the patients to come to the hospital. So many of these follow-ups were on telephone. So our counselors, they maintain a register where they have dedicated 2 or 3 pages for every patient, and every call, whatever they talked, they will register on, they will write on those registers, and they will ask the mothers to weigh the baby at one place and tell them the weight. So from a distance, we can only monitor the weight, but when they come to the hospital, we monitor every other parameter as well. So we have a few telemedicine centers. So sometimes the patients visit to those telemedicine centers in different cities. So once they go there we take the complete anthropometric measurement, and there also a chart is maintained. So child's growth is monitored, and a red flag is added, the previous slide. So red flag is added for any any critical case or lack of growth. And if there is a red flag, we swing into action. We call them, we visit them, we take a pediatrician's help, we counsel them again and again, we support them with nutrition material and money, whatever is required. Sometimes we report them to the district administration or the health authorities there. When they come, we sometimes admonish them also. We do whatever it takes to save the child. So, and we have been successful most of the time. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, so these are the kind of registers that we maintain. Our counselors will write every call she made, even if it is not responding. She will write it that the phone call was not being responded, or who talked on the phone, whether it was a mother or a grandmother or a grandfather or the father of the child. So what he said, and she assesses whether they're following all the instructions or not. She re-emphasizes the instructions, and she finds it out whether the right kind of milk and the right amount is being given or not, whether the hygienic methods are being used or not. Next. Next slide. So you can see there are many red flags in this register. So initially we were not having any red flags. So one day this idea came to me because we were not able to track whatever was happening. The counselors were calling them, noting it down, but we were not able to follow the ones which required help. So I asked them to add a red flag if something was going wrong. So they started adding the red flag, and we started taking actions specifically for these patients. Next. So I will now mention some of the examples. This was the child who came from West Bengal to us. A child was weighing 2.4 kg at the age of 5 months. Now this child, this is an important story, and all plastic surgeons must listen to this. All cleft surgeons must listen to this. This child went to medical college in a plastic surgery department, not once, but 8 times. And every time the mother was told the child is low weight, and you bring the child when the child is healthy and the weight is not good enough for surgery. So every time they were returned. So they made significant effort. They went 8 times there. Then somehow they came to us, and we explained them, gave all the counseling, and gave a lot of food materials, utensils, everything. And we told them to feed the baby and come back when the child is healthy. Next slide. Next slide, please. So, but this picture did not leave my mind. This did not go. And the next day, when I was taking my breakfast, I recalled this picture, and I thought I am making the same mistake that the doctors in other medical colleges did. So I'm sending them back. The child may not reach back home alive. So I made a phone call to my hospital to see where the patient is. So from the hospital, a call was made. They were sitting at the railway station waiting for the train, and we called them back. So they came to the hospital back. Next slide. And with the help of a pediatrician, we started treating this patient for malnutrition. We kept him in the hospital for 24 days. We explained them because sometimes managing malnutrition can give rise to many complications. And we explained them well, and they were agreeing for everything. We kept them in the hospital for 24 days, and then we explained them and gave them counseling, gave them food material, and sent them back home. And they returned back 2 months later. Next slide, please. Yeah. So this was a child when he came to us, 2.4 kgs at 5 months. And this was at 7 months, 6.3 kg. He was the healthy baby. We admitted him and operated him for the bilateral cleft lip. Next slide. So another baby was Lakshmi, and she was coming from a neighboring state, from a neighboring district. And And the child was not doing well. And we were giving all the advice. We were following them on telephone. We also gave them milk and other things. But the child was not growing well. But they were coming regularly. That was a good thing. So one day I asked them, I used to admonish them. And I even called the district magistrate of that district, and who sent the health authorities to the patient's home to explain them. But I did not realize what the problem was. The problem was this girl was the fourth girl child born in the family and with the deformity. And everybody in the family and in neighborhood were cursing the mother. And the mother was somehow thinking that if the child passes off, at least she will be saved from the curse. But we explained them, and the district authorities explained them. They kept on visiting them, and we kept on calling them, and on phone and all the hospital also. Next. And the child grew well, and we operated upon her, and the parents were very happy. So we kept on providing all the support, and the child became healthy, and we operated upon her, and even the parents were happy later on. Next. So the cost of the doctor's fee or course of drug and transport to reach a health center can be devastating for many families like this. Next. So many times, like in the next family that I'm going to show you, a very poor and vulnerable people may have to make harsh choices, knowingly putting their own health at risk. And in this family, the husband was a daily wage laborer, and mother was not doing anything. They had no money for food for themselves and the child. Although we were supporting that, we started supporting the child, providing them milk and other things. We found that one day I looked at the mother and I found her very pale, and I got her hemoglobin checked. It was 6 grams. Next slide. So we started supporting the mother as well. And from that day in all our wards, there is a paper pasted that all the mothers and all the ladies come to the hospital will be tested for anemia. And trust me, as much as 30% ladies that come to our hospital are severely anemic. Their hemoglobin is 8, 7, 8.5 like this. So now we test the hemoglobin of every lady that comes to our hospital, and we are finding a lot of them are anemic. We provide them supplementation. Sometimes we refer them to gynecologist or a physician. So when we look at the child, we also have to look at the mother and the family and support them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Subodh. We move on to Ishani, who is going to tell us about the Smile Train perspective and, the way the program is to be run, or the way that we are planning the nutrition program in India.
Yes, so I would start, and our presentation would briefly look at, how do you know that, your region requires a nutrition program? And once you know that, how do you initiate a nutrition program? How do you participate in it? Next slide. So basically, how do you know is basis, how many children in your center are actually going back and you're not able to treat them because they were found malnourished, they were found underweight. So is it a high volume around, or is it like just a few patients who are coming and going back? So you need to evaluate this particular status. You need to evaluate the nutritional status of the children who are coming to your place. At the same time, you also need to evaluate it with the nutritional status of the children in your region. Because a lot of times what we have seen is that there are states which are extremely malnourished, where automatically children who are coming with cleft would be also found malnourished more than other regions where the prevalence of malnourishment is quite low. Usually we can also refer to the government website for this, for the data. So, once you're sure and you want to start a nutrition program, these are the basic requirements that need to be in place before you apply. So starting with having the tools for measuring, to having a dedicated person who would be doing the dedicated person for a social worker who would be coordinating between the patient, between the doctor, following up with the patient and effectively communicate, because there's a lot of counseling involved. And so we need a dedicated person for that. You need to support the transportation of the families that are coming from a long distance, and also have a certain protocol of coordination, talking about bridging the gap between the nutritional support to the stage where the child gets a surgery done. So, what is the protocol in place? Having a clarity of the roles and responsibilities of the people involved. And of course, have documentation. There are Smile Train norms also. At the same time, there are other documentations which would be discussed shortly. Next slide. At the same time, as I was saying, having the protocol also would include that even though you have the guidelines, but in your own region, how do you identify malnourished children? How are they registered? What kind of communication materials, education materials are being given out to the families? And how is the support to feeding? What to provide, how to provide, what kind of feeding to provide? These things need to be laid out clearly. And once you have a plan in place, we would request you to please get in touch with the CRM of your area, discuss your plan, discuss the kind of budget you think you would require and how you want to go about it, and then apply for the program. The next slide. Once applied and once approved and once a partner is enrolled for the nutrition program, what you would see is that on your STX page, along with other things, there would be a tab for nutrition records. And along with the other documents, you would also be able to access patient information form. There would be nutrition forms also for it. You would be able to access education materials that can be printed out and handed over to your patients, can be used as a resource internally within the hospital. And as I already said, there needs to be a protocol, but just make sure that it's strengthened from the process of registering, feeding, and following up. Following up becomes a very important part of the entire nutrition program, because once a child goes back and never returns, then all your efforts would fall flat. So what are your follow-up protocols? Who's doing it and what are you seeing? What is the frequency of follow-up? Is it weekly, monthly, depending on the severity also of the child? Then at the same time, creating a designated space for stocking the feeding supplies that we have been discussing so far, and not just stocking, but a clear-cut monitoring of how much is being used, how is it getting used. We need to track that. Of course, the feeding supplies, we also call them nutrition packages at times. They are dependent on the age group of the children. So obviously, a child below the age of 6 months, their requirement would be different from the requirements of a child above the age of 6 months. So you need to keep these angles also in mind. You need to give them feeding equipment, all of that. And of course, from time to time, please keep Smile Train informed. It is important that any development or any even setback is discussed with your CRM on a regular basis. And the aim is that yes, the families, once they go back, they should come back for a follow-up, definitely. So yes, we've discussed this already. And the next slide. We've talked about following up also. Yeah, so this is how the patient information form for nutrition program looks like. It is basically capturing the information, basic general information of your patients. At the same time, it also looks into what are the feeding practices of the caregiver to the child. And it's very simple. You just need to click on it and it's done. And there is a third angle to it, which is that of information that needs to be filled in by the counselor who would be connecting and would be coordinating with the patient. That's the next slide. Yes. So this is where you can see, the questions are very, very simply put. How do you prepare formulated milk? So it's very specific. And once this form is filled up, we request you to upload it on STX. Similarly, once the patient goes back and you are following up, and we expect that the patient should be back in the hospital, there would be a similar follow-up patient information form, which is there in the next slide. So this is the follow-up form, which again talks about, what is the status of the child. And once we compare the status from the time the child arrived to the current status, I think that should give you a pretty good idea of whether or not there's been any change or improvement. And then it looks into what kind of support has been provided to the family. All of this is recorded, and the day when the family comes, this needs to be filled up, and then it needs to be uploaded also on STX the same day. Next slide. So this is basically an example of, so we, as I said, Smile Train on your STX, you will find a couple of, good recommendations and good, resource materials that could be printed out. And this is one of them. Right now, what you're seeing is a feeding recommendation in English, but we also have this in Bengali and we have it in Hindi also. You would notice that there are also some Smile Train feeding videos that, that could be useful, especially when you're counseling the parents, when you're counseling, the family members. I think it's useful even for your own staff to have a look. Slide after this. So the objective of doing all of this, what the kind of outcome that we are expecting here is that, to bring the child with cleft at par and, an identical nutritional status with that of a child who does not have cleft. And there shouldn't be any difference, which automatically means that, there should be improved eating and feeding practices followed at home. That will get reflected in the nutritional status of the child. The malnourished child should be able to also get the desired weight, status, and also receive surgery. Of course, the process does not end there. There is post-operative care and safe discharge of the patient that gets included. With this, the program, we can say that the entire process is covered. That's it. So the summary part of it would be, Mamta, would you please?
Yeah, thanks, Ishani. So you've heard the experts talk about what is malnutrition, what is nutrition, and the rest of it, and all of the details, how to measure impact. Now, bringing all of this information together in a Smile Train program. So Smile Train nutrition program is built on taking advice from experts around the world, and we packaged it together and called it the Smile Train nutrition program. So in a nutshell, what is it that you as a partner need to do? What is it that you need to set up? What is it that you need to do in your system to start a program like this? The first step is the get basics ready. Whether it's monitoring equipment, your counselor, a dedicated space in one corner, nothing much is required. Just very basic things that you need to get in place before you even start talking to the your contact at Smile Train and your area in charge. The second step is applying for the nutrition program. Yes, there are certain very basic, again, there is not too much of paperwork that we require you to do, but very basic information that we require from you to enable us to put you on the system for a nutrition program so that we can start supporting you with the funding, with the know-how, with the training. Everything is available at Smile Train, but yes, there is a process to do that. How do you get to the process? You need to get in touch with your area in charge for telling you all the details about it. Everything is available, all the resource materials, all the, the videos, the posters, the leaflets, the pamphlets, and they're available in all of the languages. And they're readily available, they're accessible to you. So you need to first apply for that and then get access to all of these materials. The third step is obviously implementing the program. So making all of these little things that you've already put in place. Once your name and your details are on our system for this nutritional support program, then you need to actually implement the program. You get all the mechanics together, all of the experts who've spoken today about feeding, about proper nutrition, about micronutrients, about taking the weight and age, and all of those evaluations and everything. We have that in one place. We will give it to you. We will train you, people who are interested further on this. So you don't need to remember it right now. We will get that over to you soon. So that will be a part of your implementation program. Step number 4 is record keeping and measuring the impact and monitoring. So again, as Ishani said, as Dr. Subodh said, as everyone today on the panel said, that you have to have a robust follow-up system. You have to have a system where children that you're caring for need to come back to you at regular intervals. They have to keep coming back to you in order that you keep all of the details together. And step 5 is the most important, which is getting all of this information together and uploading it onto STX. It's just not mechanical action that we require from your side. Remember, whatever is there on STX is evaluated. We merge all of these records together. We track the patient progress, and we can help you with this data. So uploading to STX is only to enhance your program further and to help you all further. So with this, we are kind of, we've come towards the end of this webinar, and I turn over to you. I'm going to, what you can do is you can unmute your mic one by one if you have a question, and you can address your questions to Dr. Padmasini, to Roshan, to Dr. Subodh.
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, you spoke something about the amylase-rich flour, wherein you can increase the intake of the flour. Could you highlight more about it, please?
Yeah, so the amylase-rich flour, the procedure to make is very easy and can be made at any household. Basically, what we do is we soak the grain or the millet that is the base. It could be ragi, wheat, jowar. So the grain is first soaked for around 8 to 12 hours. It is then removed from the water and tied and kept for germination. The germination process could take anywhere from 12 to 24 hours. After which the grains, the germinated grains are dried either under a fan or in the sun hygienically, and then it is roasted. These germinated and dried grains, after being roasted, are cooled and then made into a powder, which is then strained or sieved, and the fine powder that is left behind is called the amylase-rich flour. This can be used to make porridges, khichdi, or can be added to different foods that you are making.
Thank you, Roshan. We'll go to the next question.
Ma'am, I just wanted to ask, can we give milk on the same day of the cleft palate patient on the day of surgery? As ma'am told, we can give after 4 hours or 6 hours after surgery.
Yeah,
so on the same day.
Yeah.
For the cleft patient.
Yeah, we have been giving it routinely for so many years. For more than 2 decades, okay. I have been giving it, and safely. There's absolutely no problem. So what we tell the mother is, after you have given milk, give 1 or 2 spoons of water as well. After every feed, you give some water. And if they're whatever milk that you are using, they used to pass it through a strainer, right? And then they give it. So first we start with clear fluid, then milk, and after the milk, they have to give 1 or 2 or 3 spoons of water as well.
Thank you, Dr. Subodh. Next question, please.
Hello. Yeah, hi, this is Dr. Renu here from Bangalore. My question is, actually, I need a comment on this. And anybody can tell me about this because I'm in a fix. You know, we have started giving formula to our babies, cleft babies now. But of late, I've also seen that some of these mothers have a similar age group child. For example, a 1 year or 1.5 year toddler is again with this 2-3 months old baby. So they, I think they also share this formula with this child because they themselves sometimes don't have any support for milk for the other children. Especially I've seen in this lockdown period. So I am not sure how many packets of formula should be given to a child because when we do nasoalveolar molding, we call them every 15 days. Earlier, I was giving like 3 packets for 15 months, but I'm not sure how much has to be given.
Right. So I'll let Dr. Padmasini answer this.
No, I think this is more programmatic. Do you want to support the child or do you want to support the family?
No, she's talking about what is your question, Renu?
I need actually, first of all, how much of formula a child uses in a week, means a packet in 7 to 8 days, accordingly we can calculate. Because what I have seen that some parents come with the formula of 2 packets finished in 10 days. So what some of them tell that they feed this formula to the other child also, which we can't say you can't do this, but they're doing it. Right. Yeah. So we are in a fix.
What is your question? So that's okay.
My question, my question is
how
many packets can be given to in 15 days? See, for a child of 2-3 months, how much of formula can he take in 15 months? So accordingly, we can calculate and give them. You know?
Oh, that I can tell you. I can tell you how much a baby can consume. A typical baby will take 120 ml per kg body weight in 24 hours. So according to that, you can calculate the requirement. It can be plus minus 10%, depending upon the environmental temperature, the kind of clothing that the child is wearing. But up to 6 months, when you don't give any other fluid, the requirement is around 120 ml per kg body weight.
So for every baby, we have to calculate.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Padmasini. Any other question? So if there are no questions,
I had a request to make.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Like, sometimes, most of the times we send our babies to our pediatrician, like as even Subodh sir said, we try to counsel them and then send it to our pediatricians. But a lot of times it happens that when the baby comes to us at that time, the pediatrician is not available and we have to titrate the dose of the hematinics or the multivitamins. So if age wise or weight wise, if we can get the dose of the hematinic titrated, if a chart can be formulated, it will be really helpful for all of us, I think.
Sure, we will give that to you.
Sure, thank you, ma'am.
And ma'am, a direct breastfeed after lip surgery is recommended, like, or through some katori, chammach, or direct the child can breastfeed after lip surgery.
In our center, we are asking them to not breastfeed for the first 6 hours. After that, we start breastfeeding.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am.
Hello, good evening, ma'am. Yeah, my question is actually most of the cleft children, when they're coming and you ask their mothers, a lot of them are not able to breastfeed. They say they haven't really been able to feed their babies, and not just because of difficulties, but because they're not producing enough milk. But some of them are able to breastfeed their babies, and in that case, it's difficult to understand how much milk goes in one feeding cycle. So how do we ascertain, is there any guideline regarding, the number of times a child should be fed if the child is purely on breast milk? And, and even despite that, if the child is not gaining weight, what other measures should we, along with the breast milk, should we be prescribing for the child, and in what quantities and in what frequency, what is the duration for that kind of regime?
So your question is how to assess the adequacy of breast milk.
Right.
Am I right? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. It is very unusual for a child with a cleft lip and palate to be able to suck effectively. As I have said throughout my talk, the idea of putting the baby to breast is to keep the hormones flowing.
Right.
We do not allow the baby to suck for more than 5 minutes because a lot of calorie is being spent in the act of sucking. So if you allow the act to go on for more than 5 minutes, the baby may actually lose weight without effectively taking in any nutrition. So at the end of 5 minutes on each side, we recommend that the milk be expressed and fed with an appropriate feeding device. So that way you will know the volume of milk. And we have already discussed that the minimum requirement is 120 ml per kg per day. The other ways by which you can cleft lip alone, the child is on direct breastfeeds. You don't need to express and give. The two parameters which you monitor on a daily basis, you look at the number of wet nappies. There should be at least 6 wet nappies in a 24-hour period. At least 6 wet nappies. And the urine should be pale yellow in color. It should not become dark yellow. The second most important parameter is the weight gain. We expect a weight gain of 30 grams per day in the first 3 months of life and 20 grams per day in the next 3 months of life. So this is for knowing the adequacy of breast milk in the first 6 months.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
So we do not have time for more questions. If you have any, I'm sure you will have a lot of other questions as well. Please write, please send us an email. We will forward them to Dr. Padmasini, Roshan, and Dr. Subodh, and we will ensure that we get back to you.
So thank you very much for this opportunity.
So
it was a real pleasure being a part of this webinar.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Padmasini. Thank you, Roshan, and thank you, Dr. Subodh. for
so
working
much.
with us on this. It's been a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.